Right. It's my pleasure to introduce Paulus Schoutsen. Close enough. Paulus is the founder for Home Assistant. If you're not aware of what Home Assistant is, you should try it. It's an app available in all the app stores, Apple as well as Android, um, for home automation. And he's also a co-founder of Nobu Casa, which is the cloud part of a Home Assistant. His work revolves around building the open home. That's his vision. His vision is of a smart home that offers privacy, choice, and durability. Home Assistant is the second most active open source project on GitHub, and his community of tinkerers, and he has contributors from all around the world, are constantly pushing the boundaries for what a smart home can do. So if you have not tried Home Assistant, you should, and I'll hand it over to Paulus to give us more information about Home Assistant. Take it away.
All right. Hello. As you said, my name is Paulus Schoutsen. That's the correct pronunciation, but it doesn't. It often goes wrong. I'm super stoked to be here. With Home Assistant, our community is slowly starting to like Thread, mainly, of course, because Matter came around. Before that, consumers weren't really exposed. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about today. What is Home Assistant? Why are we doing Home Assistant? How does it work? And what are we doing with Thread? I thought it was on this slide. Great. So Home Assistant. Home Assistant is an open source home automation platform with a focus on local control and privacy. What does it mean? Is that we keep all your data local and it's accessible for other applications, full APIs. This is kind of the opposite of what you expect most products to do. Most products will gather data in your house. They send it into their cloud. They build these data silos. And the only way you can access your own data will be through apps of that vendor. Now, some products, like for example, Philips Hue, will have an API so you can get the data out. But then Philips Hue doesn't work with thermostats. So you still need like a home automation solution on top of it. Now, Home Assistant, I started in 2013, which has been 10 years ago. And actually, because I got the Philips Hue lights, I got the hub. It had a local API. I was like, this is great. Wrote a small Python script. Started controlling my lights. I was like, I should do something with it. I had it like turn on the lights when the sun was setting. 2 days later, I realized, well, it's actually already dark when the sun is setting. I need to do like an hour offset. Then another 2 days went over. I was like, now the lights are being turned on even when I'm not at home. I added presence detection. The ball started rolling. I decided, you know what? Let me just make this open source. Like I hadn't really dabbled much in open source, but I was like, maybe somebody else likes this script. So I did, and now 10 years later, we are the second most active contributed project on GitHub. This is a screenshot of the state of the Octoverse. For the people not familiar with GitHub, this is the place where 95% of the world's open source projects are developed. They publish a report every year. And this is the most contributed project. We were number 2 with 13,500 people contributing to Home Assistant. And what is actually very interesting, if you look at this list, is that most of the projects on this list, they are by companies that have like, really big pockets, right? They spend a lot of money on engineering, developer relations, marketing to get their projects like, in the mind of developers, get people to contribute to. But then there's Home Assistant. Now, Home Assistant is big. This is Home Assistant Analytics. It's an opt-in analytics service. We have around 250,000 active instances reporting in, but we kind of estimate that only 1 in 3 people will opt into the analytics. So we assume around like 750,000 active instances worldwide. And when I say worldwide, it really is worldwide, right? Because you can download and install Home Assistant for free. All you need is a Raspberry Pi or run it as a virtual machine, run it in Docker. And so you really see like every country almost in the world is represented. Not just, America and Europe are big, by far the biggest, but you see in Asia and Africa, South America, everywhere there are, all over the world are Home Assistant users. Now you can actually see already some different colored lines, and that is because there's different ways of installing Home Assistant. But by far the most popular one is called the Home Assistant operating system, because it turns your Raspberry Pi into a home automation hub, like you would expect the experience from when you get one at a shop. So you can update through the user interface. The updates will roll back if the update fails, all these things. Now, how does it work? How do you get from an open source project to turn on your lights to being the second most active contributed open source project and still keep the things running? So 5 years ago, I started Nabu Casa. And this allows me and now 24 other people to work full time on maintaining Home Assistant. Before we had Nabu Casa, I would do Home Assistant. I had a day job, so I would do Home Assistant before I got to work, after I came home from work, in the weekends, and it just didn't scale. Even back then, it was a lot of work for a lot of people. So now 25 people, there's a lot of release management, working with contributors worldwide. And so how is this funded? So with Nabu Casa, we started a cloud service called Home Assistant Cloud. Because Home Assistant runs all at home, it means that when you're not at home, you cannot access your home network because that's a security feature. But it also means you cannot access Home Assistant. So the first feature we launched is end-to-end remote encrypted access to your Home Assistant instance. So even when you're outside of your house, you can access Home Assistant. Now, we're also offering speech-to-text and text-to-speech APIs. You can run this locally, but not on a Raspberry Pi. And a lot of people on a Raspberry Pi. So if they want to use the voice assistant that we're building this year, they're going to use these kind of APIs. Then Google and Apple, Google and Amazon, their integrations, they also rely on the cloud to implement. So all these features are then offered as Home Assistant Cloud. However, people don't have to pay. Users can choose to all set this up themselves, and all the business logic of processing commands from Google, for example, all run in Home Assistant itself. So people that set it up themselves will run the same logic. What we see in generally is that, the people that have no technical experience, they will subscribe to Home Assistant Cloud, and the people that are very technical can do it themselves, but no, they don't want to maintain it, they also subscribe to Home Assistant Cloud. In the middle, there's another group of people that, they'll follow tutorials, get it working, and they're also having a good time. And by Home Assistant being so accessible, we see that a lot of people that are really into home automation are using Home Assistant. Oh, there's one slide in between. The open home. So when we were working on Home Assistant, we realized we want local control and privacy. And of course, Home Assistant is the brains of your smart home. And if the brains of your smart home is smart and works locally, the devices need to be that too. Because if your devices are all still sending the data to the cloud, we can pull your data from the cloud, process it locally, and your automations will run semi-fast, but there's still data being shared with others. So we had to broaden our vision. And so we created our open home vision where we want the smart home to be about privacy, choice, and durability. Privacy, all your data should be local by default. It's okay to have a cloud process your data, but it should be an opt-in feature, and the device should be able to function without actually using the cloud. The second thing is choice. There should be no vendor lock-in. Just because you've got a light switch from a certain vendor shouldn't be that your next product should be from that vendor too. You should be able to pick and choose whatever functionality, style, price, quality you need for your house. And the last thing is durability. There's this trend that we just buy phones, have them for a few years, we throw them out. Laptops, maybe 5 years max. But if we want to convince everybody to smartify their light switches, their light bulbs, their locks, their thermostats, their TVs, we cannot expect from them to throw it out every 5 years. Nobody's going to do it. Sometimes you enter a house and you see these thermostats that are completely discolored because they've been there for 30 years. Well, that's great. That's the kind of world we need to get to. We need to build gadgets again that will last a decade at least. And this is actually why I'm super excited about Thread, because Thread is building this kind of infrastructure. It's not tied to a protocol, right? It's not Matter only. No, maybe Matter will go up in flames. I hope not, but maybe. But at least then we all have our border routers, and maybe the next technology can leverage Thread alongside Wi-Fi to get the data into the smart home routed around. All right, this guy. So a lot of people use Home Assistant, and we see that a lot of geeks are using Home Assistant. So this is Linus from Linus Tech Tips. He runs one of the biggest tech YouTube channels. He has 15 million subscribers. He's building a new house, and he's doing it with Home Assistant. And again, we see a lot of very geeky people using Home Assistant. Why? Because they want flexibility, they want data, they want privacy, they want automation or history. And although we started with a focus on these kind of people, we're kind of slowly growing like our audience. And so right now our big focus is on what we call the outgrowers. So the outgrowers are people, they'll start with a system, Philips Hue, IKEA, Google, and eventually they will get a product that doesn't work with the others, or maybe they run into its limitations. Maybe they want more. These people, they're already sold on home automation. They're looking for something more. They will find Home Assistant and it will solve all their problems. So outgrowers is what we're currently aiming for. And we're seeing that there's a lot of opportunity there because there's a lot of people that, they want to have a great smart home. And there's not very few companies that cater exactly to those feature sets that they want. Now, I have talked about Home Assistant, but I actually haven't shown it yet. So I thought I'll throw in a few screenshots. This is like a demo dashboard. You can actually open this on your browser as well, demo.home-assistant.io, because everything we do in Home Assistant is based through the web. All the dashboards are web-based. We do have native applications on iOS and Android, but they actually wrap our web-based dashboard, but we use native for features like on the Apple Watch, the Android Watch, the Android Auto. We're launching Android Automotive soon. And so those are all native UIs that we've built. Now, as you can see on the dashboard, people can control their lights, their media players, see how warm it is. But for example, because people have dashboards like in their kitchen, for example, in the morning they look at it, people will also, for example, have their commute on it, or maybe their exchange rate or anything else they're interested in. Now, one thing you already saw on the first dashboard was like energy usage. 2 years ago, we did a big push on energy management because we want to help people like get on top of their energy usage, because that saves money, it saves the climate, it's important. And to get insight into your energy and to actually have your smart home act on it, you need to gather data from various sources. You need to aggregate that data. You need to visualize that data. You need to automate on the data. And that's all things Home Assistant is excellent at. So we made this dashboard and like we pull in all this different information. So for example, here you can see the blue bars, different shades of blue, electricity using from the grid. The orange and the purple is electricity from solar. For purple, it's electricity that the house could not use and had to return to the grid. And then you see that dotted line on the bottom, the screenshot suddenly had to cut it off. That's actually the forecast of how much solar you're going to generate today. So people are using this, for example, oh, I'm going to like generate more energy than I need. Let me turn on the dishwasher. Let me charge my car. Let me fill up my home battery. And so this is being used worldwide. It was very popular in Europe this year, last year, as the energy prices were skyrocketing. And so, yeah, it's been very well received. Now, I already kind of touched upon it. We have data history. You can like just pull in any data that is being gathered by Home Assistant. You can have you can have analytics on it. You can have, we keep statistics. You can browse data going back as long as data has been gathered. But not only for sensors, but we also keep track about relations of events that happened in your system. Let's say a user turns on the light switch, the light turns on. Because the light turns on, you have an automation that turns on 2 more switches. The chain of events and the relationship between that data is all stored in Home Assistant as well. And we do this so that people can run machine learning on their data. And we see, for example, universities already using Home Assistant to start analyzing or training algorithms, test new algorithms, because they can just try it out on the data that they have at home. All right, threat. This is a screenshot of my Home Assistant instance in my office. It shows us various products that we integrate with. Home Assistant integrates with like, I don't know the latest number, but over like 1,500 integrations of different APIs, but also like devices, services, anything, right? So some things are really broad, like Matter, like, oh, we support all Matter devices. Some are more like smaller ecosystems, like a Sonos or Philips Hue or SwitchBot. Now, our journey into threat really started around Matter, right? Because that's finally where it was accessible enough. I mean, before Matter, the real exposure our users had to threat was with HomeKit, but that was like a small sliver of like the diehard HomeKit fans were really like, oh, we're gonna get like these threat devices. So now that we've been since last November when Matter launched, we've launched our Matter controller as well, and we've been really also getting deeper into threat. Now you can see we have two different integrations here. One is called Open Threat Border Router. The other is called Threat. The Open Threat Border Router, that is because we've actually started making hardware that has threat capabilities in it. Oh, I'm going one. Oh, there's one. Okay, there's one slide missing. I'll stick to this one. We started making hardware. We have because we initially have Home Assistant use a Raspberry Pi, but to install Home Assistant on the Raspberry Pi and get started, we had to tell people, download this image, flash it to an SD card, and put it in your Raspberry Pi. And most people don't even know those words, right? Let alone that they can follow these instructions. So we first started with let's make a ready-made box that just runs Home Assistant. We built it around a Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4, and we included this chip from Silicon Labs that provides Zigbee. And then Silicon Labs released a software called Multipan that actually allows us to run Zigbee and Thread on the same chip. So we've been experimenting with that, and that's been working very good. But then, of course, our existing user base was well, we didn't buy the Home Assistant Yellow because we already have Home Assistant running. What do you have for us? So we took that same chip, we put it on a USB stick, and we launched the Home Assistant Sky Connect. Now, both these pieces of hardware has been very well received. This is an article on The Verge. It's a tech news website here in the United States, very big. Just a couple of weeks ago, they tried out the Home Assistant Sky Connect, and they loved it. It actually, they actually reconfigured their whole house using Home Assistant. It's not necessary, but this person, I guess, went really deep in and loved it. I'm missing a few slides, but it's okay. We are using the Open Threat Border Router with the Silicon Labs chip. But what we realized is that we want to manage the threat border router. We want to manage the credentials because our goal is that for a user to have the best experience with Matter, all the threat border routers need to be aligned. They all need to have the same data set credentials. So the first thing we had to do is that we had to interact with the threat border router and get the credentials and set the credentials. So that wasn't there. So we have actually contributed back to Open Threat reference implementation. And this has been accepted. And as you can see, I highlighted this comment saying well, it's the most significant improvement since its inception. And actually, a reference implementation is great. And I think if Threat is going to succeed, it's because of this reference implementation. I think the same with Matter, because I've seen it the hard way with Zigbee and Z-Wave. There is no reference implementations. There are open source versions, but the only open source implementations of Zigbee and Z-Wave that have full-time people working on it are the ones that our team is building. Because otherwise there's just private implementation and people don't want to share their work without being compensated for it. So this was these slides were flipped, not sure why. And this is the slide I was missing earlier. This is the hardware where we're building. Left is the Home Assistant Yellow and right is the Sky Connect. And this is our threat panel right now in Home Assistant. And like I said, we really want people to be aware of threat. I bet there's a lot of users out there that are actually using threat without, or having a threat network in their house without actually knowing they're having a threat network because they have a HomePod, they have a Google Home Hub, and they don't know that these things have been enabled. I was looking at Home Assistant Analytics because this is public data. And I think right now we see around 12% of our user base already having threat enabled, which is pretty big adoption. And the reason people are having threat enabled is because we discover threat on the network and we say, hey, do you want to enable threat management? They're like, okay. Even if they don't run a threat border router, they can still see, hey, threat is there. Now, as you can see, we detect other border routers on the network through MDNS, and we're going to list all of them because our goal is to help guide the user to form a single network. And I say that's our goal because we're not there yet at all. Right now for Google on Android, we can actually get the preferred credential data set, import it into Home Assistant and try to set that on our border router. For Apple, we're still waiting on the entitlement to get our iOS app access this data too. But mainly like that will be just to get the data sets that Google and Android use. Ideally, there will be a way we can just sync them up. If you created your threat network first with Google, with Home Assistant, and then you want to start using Google products, you shouldn't have to adopt their data set that they already started using for one device. We also see that like we've contributed like our REST API back to OpenThread, and we were talking with GLEnet. They're working on their border router, the GS200, and they're actually adopting our patch set as well already to make sure that they're compatible with the Home Assistant, because they want our users to be able to get a single thread network. Now, this is if you want to learn more about Home Assistant, you can check it out, homeassistant.io. And anything I've shown today, including like the Home Assistant yellow PCB and the front end, everything we're doing, everything is open source and is just freely accessible and to use for people. The reason we're putting out everything as open source is that our goal is, with the open home, is to create a home about privacy, choice, and durability. So if anyone like adopts our technology, those values are inherited in our technology. So then they're not competition, but allies in getting a more private home. Thank you.